Now is we're going to move ourselves to the HPR. HPR system, you have 3 holes here on the bottom. You have one that's actually a set screw. The center hole here is where you adjust your velocity, and the third hole here is for an optional set screw if you're starting to have issues to where the velocity adjustment screws get loose or something of that nature. You can actually install one so it only adjusts so far. It's optional. We don't have to we don't put them in from the factory, but it's an optional option if you guys wanted to do so. The reason we have this set screw here is we have a completely round HPR system, and once it's in a round core and you start to adjust your velocities and stuff like that, it'll actually just spin itself. We don't want it to spin. That's why we put the set screw in there, because on both sides of the HPR lower core, which is the velocity adjustment housing, let me push this out for you guys. And sometimes, you know, it's a little hard to get out, but that's alright. You actually have 2 grooves here, one on each side. And then you have on the bottom here the same 2 grooves. These grooves line up with that set screw. If you're off to where it's actually straight, just like this, you've seated all the way down. If you're turned a little bit and that set screw hits right here, what's going to end up happening is you're going to raise your pressure in your HPR, and you're never going to settle down or tune right. Velocity is going to be spiking all over the place because you're actually overpressurizing the marker by not letting the seat down. Even though it's adjustable, you're putting so much tension against that spring, you're not giving any slack for that spring to actually relieve its tension each time. So you can start to see a lot of issues with that. So that's your core and your HPR body, your lower velocity adjustment core. Next you have, which is our HPR bonnet. Internally you have your piston and your spring. So we're going to go ahead and pull these out. Just use a pair of pliers, you don't have to hurt anything, you know, just barely pull it, it'll come out. Always inspect the internal portion of this bonnet for scratches, damage, dirt, wear, anything like that. And if you start to see that, make sure you always clean this out, change out the O-ring, it'll help it seat back up and stuff like that. So you have your spring, make sure you don't lose these. Then you have your HPR piston. Your HPR piston, let's go ahead and wipe this down. You have a few O-rings on this here. You have an outer 14, and then you have a 0.7, which is sealing inside the velocity adjustment housing. What that O-ring does is will prevent the piston to overpressurize and not regulate inside the marker, because you want this thing to seal off so that once the spring is depressed or it's actually relieved its tension after each cycle, the piston has somewhere to seal off, so there's no air passing by or anything like that. Next, you have your reg seat cup, which is at the lower portion of the piston itself. This right here, we've seen a lot of people have a couple issues with, and we've taken some actions to make sure it's adhered correctly inside the piston. But what we've seen a few times is people over cranking the velocity adjustment screw to kind of shut it off. And once you do that, we'll go ahead and we'll pull this apart real quick. This actually will unscrew and slide right out the bottom. But what happens is, as this thing is adjusted or you try to shut your flow of air off, this portion right here of the velocity adjustment screw and the piston seal off. And once that does is it shuts off the flow of air coming inside the regulator into the marker, and you can actually, you know, readjust from that point, but it completely shuts the flow of air off. But what happens is you'll over tighten this and crush this. This is just a little rubber, it's a hardened rubber little cup, and once that is crushed, it'll actually fall, it'll crack, and you'll get a major leak with inside the marker, and it'll be leaking from the solenoid. it'll vent itself out of the solenoid, and it could possibly damage the solenoid because you're directing the straight force of, it's not regulating any pressure. So all the pressure that's coming from your tank is going directly into that solenoid, and it could damage the solenoid. So I always want to inspect this cup seal here, cleaning it off, making sure you're not seeing any cracks. We do sell these individually because it is a part that generally it gets worn out over time. Also, you want to inspect your velocity adjustment screw for this tip. It has a little nipple on it. This little nipple, if it's damaged or crushed, you want to make sure you replace this, because it'll damage the lower portion of this cup seal here. It'll actually cut into it and stuff like that. But inspecting the O-rings on this, inspecting the threads, making sure your Allen key slot is nice and tight and snug. Next, we're going to go ahead and pull out the bonnet. What I generally do is, there is an Allen slot up inside on these regulators. I don't know if you can't necessarily see that right there, but it shouldn't be that tight to where you have to use an Allen key. You should be able to just use your hand. Be careful of the threads, do not cut yourself, but just grip around the housing of the bonnet and unscrew it. Once you get it locked off, it should unscrew fairly easy and come out. Once it comes out, you want to inspect the internals here, making sure you're not having any metal shavings or O-ring or dirt up inside there. Go ahead and wipe that out. Once you have that wiped out, let's go ahead and inspect the bonnet. The bonnet here, and because this is a gas-through system, we have vented holes here for your HPR side, or your high pressure side, and the center portion here, which is your low pressure side. The center portion here is sealed off by this British 611 O-ring here. That seals off that lower half. If you start to have any type of venting as well out of the solenoid, a lot of these, 80% of any type of venting out of the solenoid that you guys hear coming out, whether it be a major leak or a small hiss, is going to point to an O-ring. These solenoids are pretty much almost indestructible unless they're damaged by an overpressurize or something of that nature, but it's generally just an O-ring that we just need to pay attention to. So this one right here will actually make it vent inside the solenoid, and it'll vent out. Next one down here is you have a 017, which seals off the HPR, the high pressure side of the regulator. Always inspect that, inspecting the threads. Next down here is you have a 018 Buna O-ring as well, and this is just a seal that seals off the HPR body. So once it gets up in there, you should feel it kind of snug up, just so it seals, it's nice and tight, and this isn't spinning off on you when you're using the marker and stuff like that. But what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and do a little maintenance on the HPR. So what we're going to do is, first we're going to take this. We've already wiped out the inside, made sure there's no dirt, excess lube and stuff like that. We're going to go ahead and wipe the out portion, inspecting the threads, using just a little bit of lube. Just this, you just want to get it wet, just so the O-rings are seated up, because it doesn't have any anything cycling against it, so it's not creating any friction. It's a stationary O-ring. You just want to make sure it seals up inside there really nice. So just making sure that they're just a little bit wet. Then we're going to go ahead and install this back into the marker. How you're going to install this back into the marker, you're going to start it off just by setting it up there. And you're going to go in reverse. You always want to start threads off in reverse. You never want to start them off by cranking them in, because what's going to happen is this is going to cockeye this way, and you're going to either ruin the threads on the bonnet or within the marker. Most likely you're going to screw up these threads within the bonnet. So you always want to go in reverse first, starting the threads up to the first portion, and then you can start going forward. If you go in reverse, it's going to line the threads up to where it's flush to one another, and then it'll always go in straight. And once you get it there, it'll actually stop all the way up. So just snug it up with your hand nice and tight. That's all you need. You don't need to crank it down with your Allen key. I try not to use Allen keys on any portions that have to take apart or stuff like that, besides, you know, your grip frames or your eye covers or your feed necks and stuff like that. I try not to use Allen keys because it's just going to create a lot of issues later on. Strip screws, over tightening. You can't strip the marker down easily. That's the biggest thing, is seeing people struggle with stripping a marker down because somebody's over tightened all the screws and really made it difficult for somebody to maintain their marker on a daily basis, which this is a very simple system to work on, coming from the power core to the HPR. As you guys can see, there's not much to the HPR at all. So once we get that, what we're going to do is we're just going to take a little bit of lube, run your finger up inside there, just a little tiny bit, get it wet, because this is the portion you want to lube mainly. What I end up doing is I just put a little bit on my finger, just get it wet, and just work it around. Work around the face of the bolt, work around the inner seal of the bolt. You don't need to put any on this cup seal here. You want to keep that pretty much dry, because you don't want too much lube on this system, because it's just going to run through and possibly gum up some stuff. Who knows? It definitely can, but you don't want to over lubricate this HPR system, because it's just going to blow it right through. Let's go ahead and insert the piston, and once you have the piston, you can actually hear a seal off. I'm going to show you guys a little trick here. The way you can tell the HPR is sealing is you have two holes here, where it's actually one hole, it's straight through. What you can do is you can actually pinch your fingers over that and push on it, and you should feel tension. Once you feel that tension, you'll be alright. You can tell. So, let's go ahead and install the piston. Your spring. Put the spring in there. Making sure not to turn your marker over if you forget you set it down, and whoop, there goes the spring, and it's halfway across the room. But let's go ahead and make sure that once the spring is in, go ahead and lay the marker down. Next, we're going to inspect the O-rings on the velocity adjustment housing. These O-rings here, I noticed here when I took this one apart, I actually nicked this O-ring, removing it. So we're going to go ahead and replace that O-ring. You want to inspect them for any nicks or pinches or metal shavings of any sort. So this one's a 14 O-ring and this one's a 17 O-ring here. On your velocity adjustment screw, these are both 007s. If for leaks, let's say we're going to have some leaks on this thing, the way to tell is this 17 O-ring that I nicked pulling it out. If this O-ring is to leak, it'll vent out the bottom of the regulator. It'll actually come out these holes, and it'll act like the velocity screw adjustment is leaking. So you need to inspect that and make sure you didn't damage that. Same goes for the velocity adjustment O-rings on this piston here. It'll blow out the exact same portion. You won't be able to tell just by putting your finger over it, because it could be this outer one or this one. So you need to take it out and actually inspect it. This inner O-ring seals inside the actual piston housing or the bonnet housing, and the way you'll know about that is you need to make sure it's actually got a good seal as you're pushing it down, because that will also vent its way out that way, and it actually won't let the regulator regulate any pressures, because you're venting all the air out the bottom of it, and you won't be able to cycle or anything like that. But let's go ahead and pull that back out. So let's go ahead and change that O-ring real quick. We're going to install this new O-ring here, get it on, and once that's on, we're going to go ahead and lubricate these O-rings a little bit, just getting them, you know, wet, stuff like that, just so they're not drying out, they're easy to install. Same goes for the velocity adjustment screw. Just get them wet. We're going to reinstall the velocity adjustment screw. Just take it easy pushing that in there, because push it too hard, it's got to be 100% straight once you push that in there, because if it's off to the left or right or not centered, you'll nick one of those O-rings reinstalling it. So let's go ahead and get the thread started by hand by threading it in, and then just go ahead. It should be nice and smooth and easy. What you're going to do is you're going to go all the way till it stops. If you leave it that way, you won't be able to thread this all the way onto the bonnet. So what I do is I do that, and then I back it out a full turn. Once I do that, then I know that the velocity adjustment screw isn't going to hit the bottom of the piston and possibly damage the lower cup. So what we're going to do is we're going to install this. This is where you guys got to pay attention. Remember these two grooves we talked about? You want to go ahead and line them up with the set screw holes. So, meaning just like that, once you push it in there, it should be down just like that, and you'll notice. So what I generally do is line them up by eye, and push that down. Once I push it down, I can actually see the groove on the opposite side of the hole. And once I know it's in that groove, if you don't see it in that groove, or you don't see the groove side to side, what you can do at this point is go ahead and just snug the velocity adjustment screw, and you can actually spin the regulator at the same time, taking your finger, pushing down on it, and you'll feel it actually and slide right in. Once you get that all taken care of, make sure that your threads here are clean. There's no dirt inside your regulator or anything like that. Your piston spring's in, your piston's in, your bonnet's nice and clean, your O-rings are inspected. So let's go ahead and thread this on there. So once, again, go in reverse to line it up, and then thread it on straight. And once you got that, there's your marker right there. If you guys have any questions, let's go ahead and post them up, stuff like that. If you need me to make another video, I'll go ahead and make a few videos for you guys. I will make one more video this week on the board, on how it works, on how to remove the board, and I will also do one more video on the manifold, disassembly, maintaining the QEV, stuff like that. Another portion on maintaining the QEV, once we've re-lubricated the bolt on a daily basis, what I normally do is, since we have that thing adjusted, let's back it out a little bit, make sure we're all the way in. Once we have that adjusted, let's go ahead and set our pressures real quick before we gas up the marker. So right now I have it closed, and it's just, literally it's barely. I'm not even putting any tension on it. That should shut the flow of air off right there. So let's go 1 full turn out, and let's go 1.5. That right there should get us around 270 feet per second, just by a turn and a half out. That's on a high pressure bottle. Mid pressure bottles is generally right around 1 3/4 to 2 turns out. Low pressure, you're around 2 1/4 to 2.5 turns out for around 300 feet per second. So let's go ahead and air this marker up. As you can tell, sealed right up, no problems, no issues. So what I do is I'll turn the marker on and turn the eyes off. What I'll do here is I'll actually stick my finger in there, holding the bolt back with my finger, it won't hurt, and just cycle the marker a few times, probably about 30 times. What I'm doing here is I'm actually forcing any lube that was in the bolt system that's left over into the QEV, into the diaphragm itself, and I'm lubricating that diaphragm. That's another portion of this marker that if you're starting to see bolt stick and stuff like that, meaning you didn't lube your bolt enough and it's not transferring itself to the QEV, you'll start to see some bolt stick and stuff like that. So you always want to make sure every time you go out and play for the day, you always want to maintain the bolt on a daily basis. Once you get it lubed up, stick your finger down in there, cycle it 20, 30 times, just to get that lube moving up inside the QEV. So once you get over to the chrono, you're ready to go, and there it is. Alright guys, well, here you go. That's a little bit of a maintenance video for the Vanguard Demon. If you have any questions, like I said, go ahead, post up, or you guys know how to get a hold of me at tech@vanguardus.com, or you can visit us at vanguardus.com for any other questions. We have a contact a tech button on there that you can go ahead and email me directly, or you can call our customer service line.